0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first questioner. It's Colin in Finchley. Hello, Colin.
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. I'd like to ask, how are we going to afford to send aeroplanes over to Ukraine if we can't afford to put aeroplanes on the new Queen Elizabeth carrier? How can we send planes over there if we can't afford to put planes on the new carrier that is the most modernist carrier in the world?
Well, I suppose the simple answer is a different type of planes, but you are right that the US Marine Corps is currently supplying some of the F-35 jets which are stationed on the QE2 carrier because the RAF doesn't have enough of them at the moment, which is kind of humiliating, isn't it? Now, Liz Truss this evening has said that she thinks fighter jets should be sent to Ukraine, which is causing a bit of controversy because normally former prime ministers, foreign secretaries don't intervene in the debate in this way. Let's go to Duncan Baker first. Now, Duncan, you've just come back from a few days in Ukraine. You drove there and back. What were you doing?
Well, I was the first MP to bring a refugee family to come and live with myself in North Norfolk, and so have been incredibly sort of involved really with what has happened over the last year. And it was in November that I took my refugee lady and her little boy over to Ukraine to see their husband and father, and we took blankets and aid, and what we saw at that time was, absolutely phenomenal, lasted me forever. But the people of Ukraine, when we pulled out of the back of our van, in amongst the 300 blankets we took, a generator, they stopped and they said, "Where did you get this from?" And we said, we got it donated by a local council in Norfolk. And they said, "We cannot get them anywhere. Can't get them in Poland, nowhere. Will you help us?" And so we went back and thought about it. And of course we're going to help them. So we've just come back from donating 112 generators, 3 vans packed full of generators, took them to Lviv and donated them to an aid agency to be put into the front line to help power orphanages, hospitals, soldiers who are fighting, community buildings. And I mean, the gratitude and the resilience of these people was just something, was quite remarkable, Iain.
Well, well done you is all I can say. What a brilliant thing to do. It must have been a real experience as well, not just the drive there and back, but just sort of being in a war zone. I mean, was it dangerous at all where you were?
Well, I did get a letter from the Foreign Office saying, "We've heard what you're doing, we don't advise you doing it." But me a little bit.
I've had one of those before.
Ignored that and carried on.
Mine was in Lebanon when the war was going on.
So, yeah, I mean, listen, when you stand there at the border and you were looking into this inky blackness at night, total blackness because all the lights are out because of the air raids, I did text my wife and say, "This is it, hear from you again in the next few days." And it is pretty scary. But you get over the border, and the telltale signs are tanks on the side of the road, blockades, young men and women with guns. But when you get into the cities, I mean, we were in Lviv, which is on the most westerly area, which we thought was pretty safe. Saying that, there was still an air raid, and the night that we were there, infrastructure was damaged. But people are trying to go about their normal lives. I mean, we went out to celebrate with the aid agency, who were just so grateful, drinking in a bar in Lviv. And you just think, this is a country at war. Yeah. But the spirit is there that these people are going to win, and we stand shoulder to shoulder. Right, back to Colin's question then. That was really, really interesting, though. Thanks for sharing the experience. Do you think we should be sending planes to Ukraine? Well, look, we have said we're going to train pilots. Why on earth would we go and train pilots if we're not going to end up giving them the hardware to be able to fly? I don't think we'll send necessarily our own planes, but we'll end up using NATO jets. And it's not like you can go and train a pilot to then go and fly a different type of aircraft. They will fly NATO jets. But the bottom line is, do I think we should actually send them? I think there will be a time when we probably will, Iain. And the reason for that is that we will have to do absolutely everything we can to get a breakthrough. Otherwise, we will enter a long, protracted stalemate, and we need to give the Ukrainians all the weapons they can possibly do to actually break that deadlock. And so I think, it's a simple question. Why on earth are we training people if we're not actually going to give them what they need? Yasmin.
Well, I don't know much about all the warfare stuff, but I do think if we want to see how exemplary we've been as a nation, towards Ukraine, it's a really big moment. When we did the right thing, we're doing the right thing. We're telling the right story about the refugees. I wish we could replicate that in other situations, because we didn't do the right thing by Afghans. We really have failed them so much. So in some ways, this has been a very important, optimistic moment in a very difficult, horrible war, that it is possible for people to feel differently about refugees if we tell a different story. And for the population in this country to have done what it's doing, it's extraordinary. Makes me proud to be British.
Yeah.
Don't faint.
Can we clip that, please, and put it out as a tweet? Patience.
I think we should do everything we possibly can to help Ukraine. Like Yasmin, I've been proud of what we've done so far. And I think we are stronger helping them, working together. So as Duncan says, NATO will probably provide the jets. Other countries are doing what they can. And I think that's the important thing, that Europe is united to support Ukraine. And beyond that, I think it's probably wise for some former prime ministers, particularly those who were only in office for a very brief period of time, to perhaps keep out of the debate for a little while and not to tell the government or the country what to do.
Tim Farron.
Well, just to challenge Colin on his point about whether we can afford to do this, I think the easy response to that is we can't afford not to do this. The reality is that Ukraine is incredibly bravely, as we've just heard, fighting for Western liberal democratic values on our behalf. And it's been the case for some time now, before Russia invaded Crimea, that the case of those, we'll call them Western freedoms, those values that we take as being red and normal, are under very serious attack from not just Russia, but potentially from China, from theocracies and dictatorships around the world. And in Ukraine is where the battle's gone from cold to hot. And for us not to support Ukraine is not only morally wrong, if we were to choose to do that, but it would also be very foolish in terms of defending our own interests and the interests of the wider free world, to coin a phrase. So we must use every resource we have to back Ukraine, and I am likewise, to show unanimity, proud that we've done so far.
Let's broaden this out a little bit. In the last hour, we were talking about defence spending, and the Chancellor is considering a request from the Defence Secretary at the moment for an extra £10 billion. We're being criticised by other European countries for not stepping up to the plate, which I have to say I think is a bit of a cheat coming from one or two of them, but there we are. But the fact is that our defences have been largely hollowed out over the past 20 or 30 years. And to say, well, let's put in another 10 billion, I don't think would touch the sides. We've got virtually no ammunition left. We've only got 200 tanks, 14 of which are going to Ukraine. Our naval forces are depleted. Our army, you could fit inside Wembley Stadium. And you think, well, it's going to take a lot more than £10 billion to match that. Tim?
Yeah. Well, no, the army is smaller now. The standing army is smaller now than any time in the last 200 years. And there has been steady attrition. Part of that was down to, I think, a level of complacency post the end of the Cold War. And steady, it's been at the bottom of the pile of priorities for governments of all flavours and colours, including the one that I belong to. So I think that it's right that we reverse that. It is not about aggression or nationalism. It's about defending our way of life, our values, and being a team player in the world. That we have a military that is up to the job. At the moment, it isn't.
Duncan, your constituency, I know, has a lot of ex-military, but I'm sure you get your ear bent over this all the time. Where do you stand on extra defence spending? Because if you spend a considerable amount more, the money's got to come from somewhere. Does it come from other departments' budgets? Does it mean extra borrowing? Does it mean extra taxation?
Well, I suppose hindsight's a wonderful thing, and yes, we haven't spent enough on our military, but that's then because we probably haven't recognised just what an uncertain geopolitical world we are now living in. And if we had thought to ourselves back in 2015, my goodness me, in 2022 there's going to be this invasion by the Russians into the Ukrainians' country, I suspect we would have had an entirely
but we had the invasion of Crimea in 2014.
Yeah.
I mean, it was eminently foreseeable.
Yeah, but we did not do anything about it.
By the so-called experts, you would have thought.
And we did not do anything about it, and I believe that was a mistake. So what we should have been doing is absolutely right. We should have been building up our forces and investing in our capabilities, but we didn't. I agree entirely that we now should be doing that. I think it is entirely a bit cheeky for other European countries to criticise our spending when actually, other than the Americans, we have given more aid to the Ukrainians than any other nation on earth. But I would certainly agree that we now do absolutely need to reinvest in our forces.
Yes.
Can I ask a dissenting question? What would a larger...
This is your role on the programme.
I'm a peacemaker these days. What is the role of a larger army for the UK?
Well, ask the Ukrainians that question.
No, because are we going to send out... This is the question. The leap between having a large army or larger, better weaponry, is that a bridge to actually being present in the war?
In Ukraine?
I mean, I don't see the sense in it, unless there is a way we're saying, if we had a bigger army, it was very well equipped, we could send our boys and girls in there. Is that what we're talking about?
I don't
Or
think...
are we just
Well, I don't think we are,
stockpiling?
but Patience, what do you think?
It's not what I'd be talking about, no. But I think we have to be, as a country, prepared to defend ourselves if the worst should happen. And at the moment, we are probably not. And that's a worrying position to be in. And Ben Wallace is just about agree that the country is so badly depleted in its armaments that we are vulnerable. And this is an uncertain world with all sorts of weird things going on. So I think it's right, and indeed the duty of a government, to try and be prepared to defend the country.
And it's not just about defending this country, is it? It's meeting NATO obligations. I think to be fair to the other European countries, that they are now questioning whether we would be able to do that. So I think
the NATO model I can completely go with. But also the smarter, we need to be thinking about a much smarter response to some of the situations that are now arising. The traditional armies and weaponry may not. I mean...
Well, that's what everyone thought until Ukraine. I mean, the government, to be fair, have spent a huge amount of money on cyber defences and cyber warfare, but maybe some of that money should have been diverted into more conventional means.
I'll just say, so Ukraine's bravery and having not keeled over, as the Russians expected a year ago, has meant that Russia has not gone into NATO territory. But if they had folded quickly, as Putin expected, I assume, then we would have been called upon to provide troops in Lithuania, Estonia, and other places which are NATO allies. We need to be able to meet those obligations. Also, a vast amount of defence spending is about deterrence, so that we don't need to fight, so that Russia and others rightly fear us and therefore don't make the first move.
Dave in Crediton sends a very troubling Alexa message saying this is a new Cuban Missile Crisis. Not quite sure I'd go that far, but you can see circumstances where it could be. That's the problem, isn't it?
That is the problem, and as Colin suggested, the root of the problem as well is that we simply don't have much money. And if we're going to spend on defence, how are we going to pay for it? Do we cut back on other areas when we've got nurses who deserve more money? Where do we make the cuts? Or, as you suggested, do we borrow? And I think much as the idea of increasing borrowings is uncomfortable, there are some things that one has to borrow for. Not unfunded tax cuts, but defence.
You've really got it in for Liz Truss, haven't you?
No, I've got it in for unfunded tax cuts.
Can I pile in on that very briefly? Because I think that Cuban Missile Crisis, I hope it's not in the same territory, but I can see how it might be. And it is a reason, I'll say this very gently, why former Prime Ministers should be aware that careless talk can cost.
Well, on that note, we're going to move on to other questions, but first let's take a break. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Tim Farron, Baroness Patience Wheatcroft, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and Duncan Baker are with me on the panel, answering your questions. 0345 6060 973. Let's go to a text question from Gordon in Hampstead, who says, Kate Forbes is one of the candidates to take over from Nicola Sturgeon. She's a member of the Free Church of Scotland and has expressed anti-abortion, anti-same-sex marriage issues, I think it means views, and has urged caution in gender recognition issues. Is her faith a political strength, a political weakness, or neither? Tim Farron, I'm going to come to you first on this, because you've had sort of similar issues, haven't you, where your views on some sort of conscience issues are maybe not quite the same as your party's.
Yeah, I guess that is true. I think that to answer the question, we'll wait and see whether it's a strength or a weakness in a few weeks' time when the result comes out. I think that I tend to think that, and I'm sure that Kate Forbes is a wiser and more capable person than me, and will therefore deal with the scrutiny that maybe I got better than I did. But I think that, you know, if we believe in diversity and we believe in defending the rights of people to be of different backgrounds, you're going to respect people's religious faith as well. One of the interesting things about the SNP contest is that I think there are 3 candidates declared, and one of perhaps Kate's most challenging opponent is Humza Yousaf, who's a Muslim. So I wonder whether that might mean that there's a slightly more intelligent discussion about the place of faith in politics. And so I hope for both of them, indeed all the candidates in that contest, that if faith comes up, and so it should, it's relevant, that it's discussed in a decent and balanced way.
But is it possible, if you are leader of a political party or somebody who's leader of a country, in modern liberal, inverted commas, Britain, to hold views that are socially conservative, to the extent that, I mean, I don't know exactly what her views are on abortion, but she's on the anti-side. She's clearly anti-same-sex marriage as well. Now, it may be that the SNP members are much more socially conservative than the politicians, which I guess is possible in your party as well. But in 2023, can someone with those views be leader of a political party?
It all depends on whether you think, let's say if you're a Christian, you think your role in politics is to legislate to make people who are not Christians live as though they were. And I fundamentally believe that is not our role. And so if you don't impose those values on others, then I think that is I think that changes the dialogue completely. Having said all that, issues like abortion are, for most parties, a conscience matter. And in any event, I can't imagine that if Kate Forbes was the First Minister, she would be launching a plan to reverse or to change the abortion laws in Scotland. So I think people should be a little bit relaxed about people's consciences. I think we'd rather have politicians who had a conscience and who felt there was some plan behind everything, and that their ambition wasn't simply about themselves and promoting themselves. And even people who lack an established, religious faith, I think ought to be reassured that somebody who has those kind of transcendent values is somebody who might be more reliable than somebody who maybe doesn't.
Say transgender then for a moment.
Maybe that's next.
Patience.
I think the overriding thing in our politicians is that they should be open and frank, but support what's most important to me, which is that they should be tolerant. And it's at the root of most religions, but not all, that there should be a degree of human kindness and understanding. And I think that the problem with some religious beliefs is that they want to do exactly what Tim said people shouldn't do, and impose their religious beliefs on others. And I really do have a difficulty with that. So I think people are perfectly entitled to have religious beliefs of their own, but certainly not to impose them on others. And I think what's happening at the moment in a debate that I'm particularly interested in, which is that over assisted dying, that people are doing their best to block assisted dying for religious reasons, and they don't own up to the religious reasons. And that seems to me unfair. Nobody's asking them to order assisted dying or indeed to undergo it themselves, just to let those who would like to have the right. And so I think tolerance and understanding is really what we need.
I know it's not my turn, but may I push back a little bit on that? So I absolutely see where you're coming from on all that, but I think to say that a worldview, we all have a worldview. Nobody's empty-headed and neutral on any issue here. all of us have a worldview. To say that you can only contribute to debate, let's say on assisted dying, if you have no religious faith, that's a nonsense.
It's not what I said.
No, okay, but that some people are motivated by a worldview that they have, which is shaped by their religious faith. I think that's just as legitimate, no more nor less legitimate than somebody who comes at it from an atheistic point.
Okay, well, let's not divert onto that. Unless somebody wants to phone in with
really
a question on assisted dying, we'd be happy to take that. Just to throw this into the mix, Professor Adam Tompkins, a constitutional law expert at Glasgow University, also a former Conservative MSP, tweeted this morning that it is, quotes, sickening that there is so much focus on Kate Forbes' Christian faith and none on Humza Yousaf's Muslim faith. Mr Yousaf tonight told LBC's Tonight with Andrew Marr that he's proud of his faith, but he doesn't use it as a basis of legislation. Yasmin, it does come to something when it's tantamount to saying that, well, you can't be a leader if you're a Christian.
No, you can be a leader if you're Christian. And I don't agree with what I think Tim is saying, which one of the things that I thought I heard you saying, that you can only have a conscience if you have faith.
No,
I have faith.
Yeah.
I have faith, but my conscience isn't based on that faith. And I want in no way my faith to be part of the public space or public policy or politics. And that's quite hard to achieve. So if you are, say, somebody who's of this Christian faith and you are against abortion, and there's a law going through and you have to cast a vote, how do you cast your vote without feeling you're betraying something you really believe?
Well, Kate Forbes clearly has done that because she voted for the gender recognition bill, and now she says that she's not really in favour of it.
Possible, but it is
that's
a difficult
some compromises
one.
a politician has to
And
make.
the Muslim, I'm sure with the Muslim candidate, it'll be the same thing, and there will be tremendous pressure.
Duncan.
Well, there's going to be an enormous amount of scrutiny now over those candidates, and particularly on their faith, I suspect, will be the contribution of newspaper editors by enormous inches over the next few weeks.
It hasn't really figured in England, has it?
No, not to the same degree, but this is what will happen. It'll now be absolute analysis of somebody's faith. For me, actually, it shouldn't be the determinant factor. The party membership will determine it. And we should be respectful, we should be tolerant. We are an incredibly tolerant society, certainly we are.
No, not incredibly. Sometimes we're very intolerant, sorry.
I actually hate this word tolerant.
But overall,
why should I be tolerated by anybody? I mean, it's actually a negative word, I think.
Well, I think overall, in terms of our society, in our country, we are versus and a great many other nations. So actually, we will see this now play out, and I hope that isn't the dominant factor of what plays out who becomes the leader of the SNP. Their faith should not be the factor that determines who becomes the leader.
I agree with you on the word tolerance, by the way. And we should be showing kindness and love for all people, whether we agree with them or not. Where I think the word tolerance is useful is when it comes to competing worldviews. We might really not like what other people think. We should tolerate them.
Yeah.
And I think where we've perhaps got wrong, we maybe assume slightly arrogantly that the modern, dare I say it, sort of liberal conceptualisation of what a democracy should look like, that's the only thing, and everything beyond it is eccentric, and we might just tolerate it. I would argue that there is no neutrality in the public square. Everybody has some kind of a faith, even if it's a faith and there being nothing, and it has a consequence on the decisions we make and the worldview we have. So a good liberal democracy is a bit angular, a bit edgy, a bit difficult, where we do tolerate one another and fight for each other's rights.
When you decided to stand for the leadership of the Lib Dems, how much did you think about these kind of issues and thought, well...
Not enough.
Did you have people, like good friends, saying to you, are you mad? Why are you doing this? You know that this is going to be an issue
you're a weird god botherer and people come after you. Yeah, so, I mean, I think to an extent, maybe I got so busy that I was slightly out of fellowship with my church, didn't spend time talking to people, going over these issues. Also, the Christians around me, wonderful, wonderful people, but not particularly politically active. So he had this sort of... So if I was to advise a person running for leadership now who is a Christian, I'd say make sure you are constantly in good fellowship with other Christians, but also other Christians who get politics, understand the compromises, understand the issues, and I'd have done it better, and hopefully...
Because it comes to something in what's supposed to be a Christian country when it's a disadvantage for you to be a Christian standing for the leadership of a political party.
I mean, that might be a peculiarly British thing. When I had a chat with Michael Weir, who was Barack Obama's faith advisor, who's one of these weird white evangelical Democrats, amazing, the other week. And we, comparing notes, in the States, you've got to pretend you've got a faith to be electable. In the UK, you've got to pretend that you haven't. I think that's exaggerated, and I don't think it's as bad as that here. I think we actually are more tolerant than many other countries when it comes to these sorts of things, and it just takes wiser people than me to stand for leadership.
And wiser people than me to make assertions about Kate Forbes, which turned out to be fundamentally untrue, because Kate Forbes did not vote on the GRR bill because she was on maternity leave. She said tonight that she would have voted against it had she been working at the time, which I guess is slightly convenient because she would have had to resign like her other fellow candidate Ash Regan did to vote against that bill. So apologies.
God moves in mysterious ways.
Well, indeed. She is the anointed one, clearly. Right, we'll move on to other questions in just a moment. If you would like to phone in and get more from patients on assisted dying and the rest of the panel, you're very welcome to do so, or indeed on anything else. It's 8:30. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC from Charlotte Morgan.
The family of Nicola Bully say their worst fears have been confirmed after police identified her body in a river in Lancashire. The mother of two had disappeared since walking her dog 3 weeks ago in St Michael's on Wyre. They've not given a cause of death. Another earthquake has struck the border between Turkey and Syria 2 weeks after a tremor killed at least 46,000 people. The 6.3 magnitude quake hit the Hatay province, which is still recovering from the disaster a fortnight ago. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says he's deeply disappointed after junior doctors voted to go on strike. Members of the British Medical Association are planning 72 hours of industrial action next month. LBC weather, some rain moving across northern and western Scotland tonight, drier elsewhere with a low of 5 Celsius.
This is LBC.
It's 8:34, Cross Question with Tim Farron, Baroness Patience Wheatcroft. And for all of those who say I shouldn't say Baroness Patience Wheatcroft, it's Baroness Wheatcroft. It's kind of all, you kind of have to give a first name as well now, don't you?
You can drop the Baroness.
OK, I'll drop the Baroness Patience, or Pat, as she's known to her friend. Oh, you should have seen that face. And Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and Duncan Baker, Conservative MP for North Norfolk. Right, Rose is in Bristol. Hello, Rose.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I just heard the news on Radio 4 and Nicola Bulley's family asking for the media to leave them alone, quote. What I don't understand is there are laws in this country against harassment and stalking. I've actually been helped by the law of harassment and it's helped me. So I don't understand why the laws in this country against harassment and stalking don't apply to the media. And this is the same thing that Harry and Meghan were complaining about. How is it that the media are allowed to bang on people's doors, phone them, not leave them alone, chase them up the street when they go to the shop? Why don't these laws of the land against harassment and stalking apply to the media?
OK.
I don't understand it.
Well, the family's statement accused journalists of misquoting and vilifying Miss Bulley's partner, Paul Ansell, other members of the family and their friends. And I think they highlighted ITV News and Sky News for having contacted them last night when they specifically asked to be left alone. Patience, you were a newspaper editor, not of a tabloid, it has to be said. How do you respond to Rose's question?
I think she's absolutely right. There's no excuse for the media harassing and stalking. And if a family have specifically asked to be left alone, the day that the body of their loved one is found, it's appalling for the media to go and knock on the door. Unforgivable. And I think it's also a breach of the editorial code. And so they should be hauled up in front of the authorities. And
does it count as harassment, though? That's Rose's accusation here.
Well, I think it probably does. And it's certainly not what should be done and not what reputable media organisations should be doing. I find this whole case quite extraordinary. The media interest in it, the coverage of it, the social media interest in it, and the police behaviour. I mean, every aspect of it is extraordinary. But there's no situation that I can think of where the media should go where they've specifically been asked not to by a grieving family.
Yasmin?
I totally agree with every word Patience has said, but there's also, it's complicated. Several other women and others went missing over this period. And one of the questions I cannot understand or answer is, why does one case ignite? And
Madeleine McCann is a good example here.
And so I've had, communication from families where their people have gone missing, saying, why is the media not interested in us?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm saying it's quite complicated, because the initial interest in Nicola Bulley did do some good. It made people aware, they started helping, all of that. And then the media acts, like, I don't know, flesh-eating monsters, really. But there is some good that comes out of initial media interest.
When you say the media, obviously the media is a big beast. Yeah. I mean, it contains broadsheet newspapers, tabloid newspapers, news channels, and here the family is specifically attacking two news organisations. They're not attacking The Sun or The Mirror, they're attacking reputable news organisations.
And that's what I mean, that it becomes so monstrous after a certain point. And we do forget. I mean, I've been a journalist 37 years now. We can forget the human beings that we're following, writing about. So I completely understand the lady who's asked the question, but I also know that people feel so utterly let down when there's no interest in missing people. Like there's a young black woman who has been missing over the same period. Nobody's run a single thing about her. So I find it, maybe we win, we lose and we win, whatever we do.
Duncan Baker, there is a a balance to strike here. We did a phone-in last week on the police sort of operation. And I remember saying to Corey, my producer, at the end of the hour, I said, I found that a profoundly uncomfortable hour to host, because you're constantly walking a tightrope, because you don't want to say anything that is inappropriate or wrong, that would upset the family. But in a sense, if you do an hour on something, you're not going to get it right all the time. Now, I think we did do it in a responsible way, but I can understand why the family would think that certain parts of the media haven't covered this responsibly.
100%. At the end of the day, this is a family, a husband left with 2 little children who has lost his wife, and the circus that has been created by some media organisations has been absolutely appalling. But it's not just that, Iain. It's also the role of how social media has been in this as well. I mean, it has been absolutely appalling. Amateur detectives turning up en masse to try and engage with what's going on, filming themselves digging on the bank, on TikTok and posting videos that go viral. How on earth has that family coped through what has been the most intense scrutiny? People just inventing stories and conspiracies about a man's wife who has passed away, thinking that they know better than the professionals who are investigating and trying to build a case around trying to find that lady. I don't know how that family has coped with it, but I think it really does make us look at our society and how some people behave. And I think it's wholly wrong what's happened to that family.
It makes you lose faith in human nature a bit when you see some of the disgraceful things that people did. By the way, Yasmin, good news, the 13-year-old that you referred to there who went missing in Southwark has now been found safe and well, but should be missing for more than a week and a half. And I think the police always say if you're not found within the first visit 6 hours or 10 hours or something like that, that is when you start to worry. But she has been found safe and well. Tim Farron.
And we didn't hear very much about that, which makes Yasmin's point very, very clearly. I can think of people I know with loved ones who have been missing for a long time, in one case who sadly passed away not long ago, and there was nothing like the kind of scrutiny and media interest that there has been in this particular case. So in some cases you would like there to be more coverage, and in this case, I mean, it's utterly heartbreaking that we now know just in the last hour or two that Nicola has died. And as Duncan says, the main thing has got to be focusing on supporting that family, which I think by and large means getting out of their hair completely. Those of us who pray for them, but to not get involved because people need to be able to grieve. And I've thought that, I mean, you talk about social media, we also have 24-hour media, and sometimes people have to invent things to talk about to keep these things in the news. I saw the awful stuff the other day. I can't remember which outlet it was. Derogatory comments on what the chief inspector was wearing. Yes. Outrageous. So I think I felt throughout all this, so not all, but so much of the media.
Actually,
was she detective inspector?
Detective superintendent, or is that below inspector?
I don't know, but anyway, a senior-ish, at least, police officer, and there was no scrutiny of the work she was doing or exposing the what we needed. The frock she was wearing, and I thought it was utterly outrageous. And ignore the sexism if we can.
To be fair, I think there was legitimate criticism of her for essentially giving public, or what was it she said, that Nicola was had vulnerabilities, and of course the natural reaction is say, well, what are they? She said, well, I'm not going to say, and then 3 hours later she did.
They did.
I think that's a legitimate area for criticism.
Indeed, but not what she was wearing.
No,
and I think that tells you an awful lot about the kind of nature of the coverage.
Right.
So it's heartbreaking, and I think it's been pretty ugly as well.
Rose, thank you very much for that. Let's squeeze in another question before the break. James is in Hitchin. Hello, James.
Good evening. Has the panel recovered yet from the childhood trauma of reading Roald Dahl novels?
See, I don't find it funny or I'm sorry. I take the other side because it's so easy to mock or to go into a defensive mode. And actually, let me tell you, Roald Dahl himself, you might not know this, in 1971...
You've done your homework.
I've done my homework. The Oompa Loompas, for example, were in previously, from the very deepest and darkest part of the African jungle, where no white man had ever been before, and they were brought over so that, they could live in what was it? I can't remember what word he used. He changed it. He changed it in 1974. He changed it after people argued with him, in particular a children's writer called Eleanor Cameron. And he turned those characters into long-haired, rosy-cheeked white people. So don't tell me the written word is sacrosanct. Enid Blyton was the same.
Have we got to a point where we can't use the word fat in case it offends somebody? Because that has apparently changed to enormous now.
Look, I go a lot into playgrounds, my neighbouring, where I live, often because I'm writing about bullying. And what's interesting, in children's playgrounds, the vocabulary changes. So there was a time when asylum seeker became the swear word. But fat is a word that they use cruelly. Children can be really cruel.
Well, children have done for centuries.
Yeah, but we are now living in times where 9-year-olds look at themselves in the mirror and hate their bodies. Mm-hmm. These are very different times. So we have to understand the context. And I think, instead of mocking and rejecting the thing, Enid Blyton, I loved Enid Blyton, right?
Magic faraway tree, can't beat it.
Then one day in school, I read this.
But big ears, you can't possibly call him big ears anymore.
Listen, this was in my class. This was in my class in primary school, and I really got upset. The face has nasty gleaming eyes, and it looked very dark. Perhaps it was a black man's face. And I got very, very upset and argued with my class, with my teacher. And these things impact on black children, on overweight children. What's wrong with trying to make it all a bit kinder?
OK, Tim?
So I don't agree with Tipexing out things that authors have written. If we don't like what he's written, don't buy or read his works. I do, however, have quite a bit of sympathy with what Yasmin says. The generation I'm part of were, I guess, at the forefront of political correctness, and I still stand by it. What is political correctness about? It's about using language that's kind, and we should use language that's kind, and we shouldn't be beating each other the head saying, oh, you're being woke, if you choose to use language that other people are comfortable with hearing. That's just basic politeness. I do, however, think that particularly, yes, some of the language that Roald Dahl uses is stuff that wouldn't necessarily be used regularly today. I just think there's something off and a little bit Orwellian about Tipexing out stuff.
So you're basically sitting on the fence trying to both ways.
I'm tolerating Roald Dahl. I'm saying you want to cancel him, don't buy his stuff, don't change what's in his books.
But,
no, I think we should change it. Because
what you said about Enid Blyton, though, I think is really interesting because, I remember, Enid Blyton was my author of choice as a child.
Mine too.
But when I think about some of the phrases that were used in those books now, they would not be acceptable.
No. And in 1971, there was a big conversation in the nation about it, and loads of things were changed in those books. So it's not now. This idea that we've gone mad.
Did you read The Secret of Spiggy Holes?
No.
Not what you should have done. Patience.
I think that the author should have the last word on what gets published under their name.
But if they're dead?
If they're dead, that's the last word. It's not up to any of us to go along and rewrite their work and publish it under their name. So if Roald Dahl wanted to change his copy, as he did, Yasmin tells us, that's fine. That's his right. But it's not my right or yours to change what's in it. I actually read the Roald Dahl books to my children, and I don't think they're particularly scarred. But then, like many of us, I grew up with the Grimm's fairy tales, and
yes,
they're pretty grim.
They are. Duncan?
Well, I'll let you into a little secret. This week, my children and little Ukrainian lad, Svetik, my wife, whilst we were in Ukraine, bought him a copy of The Twits. And he can read brilliantly well, given that English is only a language he's learned for the last few months. howling with laughter at reading the twits.
I've no idea what the twits is.
Oh, the twits is about a male and a female married who are absolutely
horrible,
horrible
people.
Mr. Twit has a beard. He keeps his old bits of food in it and eats it later on. I'm not scarred.
Obviously a Liberal Democrat.
Yeah. I've got a beard in. I'm still reading the twits and I'm not offended.
Well, you've got a little bit of a beard.
Yeah, yours
It's
not a
not
Lib Dem
about
beard.
offence.
It was a lot longer last week.
Can I just say, it's not about offence. It's not about wokery. It's about children and their world in our times and being kind and taking care of them. It's very, very different from adult novels. I would defend adult novels.
Sure,
totally.
but there's a context, isn't it? And children really are not that naive that they can't actually understand the context.
Okay,
of
we've
when
gone over time. Very interesting discussion there. It's 8:49.
LBC.
$8.52, Tim Farron, Patience Wheatcroft, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and Duncan Baker with me answering your questions. Well, I did ask you for a question on assisted dying, and as if by magic, one's coming from Jonathan in Barnes, who says, would assisted dying ever be truly acceptable in this Christian country of ours? Well, there's a theme in the programme tonight, isn't there? Patience, the floor is yours.
Yes, I think it will be. There are other Christian countries, such as the United States, where it's already acceptable. So I don't think in the end that we will be able to go on without giving people the option, only an option, if they are terminally ill, of being able to say that they would like to opt out sooner rather than later. So, yes, I think it's the Christian thing to do, myself.
Duncan?
It's a really interesting question. There was a great thought that when the new intake of the 2019 MPs came in, they were much younger, big Conservative majority. There was going to be a real chance to actually get legislation through for assisted dying, but that really hasn't happened. I know, obviously, we've had a pandemic in the middle. I used to think I was absolutely nailed on to agree that there was a case that we could go down this route of assisted dying. I watched the documentary that was on at the last week between Danny Kruger, one of my colleagues, and Prue Leith, and his mother. And they are diametrically opposed to each other's view. Prue Leith, very, very supportive of it, and Danny not so. What it does do is I urge everybody to watch it, because it really does bring out some of the more detailed, difficult decisions to make. And there are indeed some countries, certainly the Scandinavian countries, that introduced it and now certainly regret introducing it. So whereas overall I think I am in favour of it, certainly cases like people who are suffering from MND, etc., there's a real viable case for it. But I think we have to be very, very careful to get the legislation right, because the other countries that have done it sometimes haven't got it all right. I think it's a far more nuanced and difficult issue to get right than people perhaps initially think.
Yasmin.
I think in a country where we've had abortion rights, we have to have the right to die, as long as safeguards are in place. The idea that my life, and actually to describe this country as a Christian country, whatever that means, when actually fewer and fewer people are practicing Christians, we're a multidimensional, multi-faith country, and all religions will have their objections. But in the end, if we have accepted abortion as a right, I can't see why you would insist cruelly to keep people alive who are really suffering and want to go. Yeah. I don't understand it.
Tim, is there an argument here about population growth as well, that at some point in the next 100, 200 years, I mean, the world's population is going to be too much for the planet to cope with, and therefore I suspect assisted dying will go way beyond just people who are terminally ill.
Wow, so we're talking about proper euthanasia in that case.
I tried to choose my words carefully.
But that's, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, that sounds utterly dystopian. And secondly, I think all the evidence is if you want to get on top of population growth, you improve people's living quality and their healthcare because they have fewer children. That's what's happened. If you look across the world, the growth is in the areas which are the poorest. I think on the issue, first of all, I mean, I take a position where I would vote against assisted dying in Parliament for lots of reasons, but I totally understand and sympathise with the other side of the argument. I'm sure it is mostly born out of a desire to be compassionate. Also, as Yasmin has alluded to, people will say this is about rights and my choice over my life. So I absolutely hear that. Insofar as my Christianity impacts my opinion on this, it's about my fundamental belief in the equal dignity of every single human being at a very lofty level. And the thing is, I'm all for, even if I don't like them, people having rights to make choices that are totally self-regarding. The difficulty with this is I'm not convinced it's totally self-regarding, because what it does, it creates a kind of acceptance within society that there is a point beyond which people are useful. Evidence tends to suggest that where it's put into practice, in some cases at least, we have seen people effectively shuffled off more quickly than they should be because family want the money and all the rest of it. You also see reduction in investment in palliative care. We stop thinking about how people can live longer well and die well, but thinking, well, OK, you've had your time, it's time to go now. And so the impact of one individual making a choice over their lives then has an impact on how society thinks about life and death. And that gets the heart of what it is to be a human being. And that's why I am more than sceptical on the issue.
But Tim, you're denying people. My mother wanted to die. And there was she kept saying, I just want to die.
I've been in the same situation.
And she starved herself, which was the most horrible thing to watch. It took months, but she just starved herself to death. So which was better?
So I've also dealt with similar situations within my own family, which is why I don't dismiss your point of view, without any consideration whatsoever. I then ask myself, what does it mean to live in a country where we choose to voluntarily end people's lives before their time? Surely the investment in living well, in dying well, in palliative care,
I took care of her. She was happy until she wanted to die.
Sure. There are complex arguments, but in the end, I think we have to recognise that the consequences of a person's choice to do that has massive implications for the
We are
society.
near the end of the programme, and I want to cheer ourselves up with our fun question at the end from Sam in Golders Green, who says, the BAFTAs are, of course, each year a chance for us to see a load of entitled people talking about how great they are. I watched with keen interest. Could your panel tell me, if they were accepting an award, which famous person they would thank first? Now, Yasmin, you must have won lots of awards in your time.
Iain Dale.
Correct answer. Duncan Baker.
Oh, probably Iain Dale.
Oh, no. What?
He's taken.
Probably my family for the support that they give.
They're not famous yet. Patience.
My husband, he should be.
Tim?
Somebody famous. Oh, I don't know, Paddy McAloon, Prefab Sprout, Britain's greatest living poet.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't expecting that. Tim Farron, Patience Wheatcroft, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and Duncan Baker, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Cross Question. We'll have another one for you tomorrow. Now, the most dangerous domestic abusers will be put on the Violent and Sex Offenders Register, according to the Home Secretary. A proposed law change will see them monitored more closely by the police, prison and probation services so they, quote, do not fall through the cracks. Such offenders also face being electronically tagged under measures being piloted in 3 UK areas. Do you think this will actually act as a bit of a deterrent to those who commit domestic abuse? I want to hear your experiences of domestic abuse over the next hour, because it's another one of those subjects that possibly we don't talk about often enough. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the discovery of Nicola Bulley's body in Lancashire is devastating. Police have made a formal identification